Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to episode 25 of the Groovy Podcast. Today is the 17th of March, and I'm Peter Ledbrook, podcasting from London, England.
And I'm Ken Cousin, podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut.
And we are missing Baruch this time around, so he's apparently in meetings. I think he'd probably rather be here. What do you think?
I think he'll probably find a way to get out of those meetings and join us. But at the moment, nothing. By the way, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Ah, happy St. Patrick's Day. I've seen the green top hats out in the streets already.
Yeah, the normally are running thick, yes.
I mean, I normally associate those with pubs, so I'm just wondering if these people have just gone drinking early, which on St. Patrick's Day is not beyond the realms of possibility.
Is that a big day in the London area? I mean, I would think it's huge in Ireland. I just don't know how it goes over in the rest of the UK.
Yeah, pretty much anywhere. There are a lot of, I mean, partly because there are a lot of Irish around the UK working and living, but also because Guinness have done such a great job at effectively promoting it and encouraging people to drink Guinness. And
yes,
and who needs an excuse to drink? Well, in London, we don't really need one. So if we're given one, all the better.
In the US, we call those marketing-driven holidays Hallmark holidays. You know, like right. Valentine's Day is a Hallmark holiday because if it wasn't for the green card companies, there may never have been the holiday, you know?
Oh, okay, cool. Because yeah, I was thinking this is the only Saints Day that I know of that actually encourages drinking. But I think blame Guinness for that or somebody. Anyway, okay, let's get back on topic.
Sure.
So we have several news items this week. I want to start with a few small ones from the Grails world. So apparently 3.1.4 was released this week or last week. There was also an issue that bothered me because I'm still kind of signed up to the Grails core GitHub repository, and there was a ton of spam. Somebody was automatically adding comments to like almost every single issue in the GitHub repository issues. Wow. And I got a notification for every single one, but fortunately that was resolved quickly. But I hope this doesn't become a thing.
I wouldn't be at all surprised. I mean, we're probably lucky it took this long for that to happen, but that's really annoying, yes.
Yeah.
How did they fix it? I have no idea.
Yes, I don't know. I didn't ask anyone, so I don't know whether it happened at the GitHub level or my email account level was like, okay, you've got all of that spam coming in, I'm going to block it. I don't think it was that. Possibly GitHub did it automatically, noticed this sort of... hopefully they check for these kinds of things because I can't imagine Grails is the only project with that problem.
No. Now, as I recall, the 3.1.4 release was really just largely a bug fix release. I don't remember there being any new features or anything. Is that right?
Well, I hope not. It is a patch release after all. Right. Although 3.1.3 introduced something, didn't it? So yeah, I think it's just bug fixes. Speaking of the GitHub issues, Jira is going down or has gone down already, I think in like the next week. So you won't have access to that at all. Hopefully that'll mean that if any results come up in Google, they will gradually disappear.
Well, what's the new system?
GitHub issues.
Oh, I see. So the old Jira, the one that had all the old issues, and it's all migrating over. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, so the migration was down, but the Jira.grails.org was kept up, and now that's going.
Wow, that's did I tell you, by the way, I have the least significant commit to the Grails codebase?
I think you did on a previous episode.
Right, it was Jeff Brown giving me a tutorial on how to contribute, and we deleted a comment on a tag. So we never actually touched any real code. It was just deleting a comment that was out of date. So I don't generally check out the Jira or any of the issues over there. I feel a little guilty because I know I should raise issues when I find problems there. I know I definitely should do that with Grails. I've been rather poor about that. I'm going to try to do more of that in the future, especially because it's so easy to do on GitHub, right?
Yeah, it's really nice now you've got the integration with the commits themselves as well. It automatically makes all the links. So that integration is really nice.
Sorry. Was the Jira going down, was that related to anything? Was that a technology decision?
They possibly they knew they wouldn't be able to keep it running. So they did that big migration to GitHub issues a while back.
So it had nothing to do with the companies or anything like that. It was just, hey, we decided we're already on Git. We might as well use it on GitHub rather.
I suspect so. I don't know for sure. So I'd have to ask Graham or one of the rest of the team. Jeff should know as well. That's not too big a deal. So actually, there's one item missing from this. Speaking of Jeff, he was looking on Twitter for somebody to look at the Grails documentation engine. So in case you're not familiar with this, the GDoc stuff is based on a wiki engine in Java called Radiox, which stopped being maintained, I think, a long time ago. And I actually had to make some changes to Radiox. So GDoc engine is effectively a custom version of the Radiox engine. So what they're hoping to do is migrate everything over to ASCII Doctor. And their current thought process is to add a Radiox generator. So rather than generating HTML, you generate ASCII Doctor or ASCII Doc. So yeah, they're looking for somebody who has good ideas for how to do that or is willing to do that. So if that sounds like a challenge you're willing and happy to accept, then go for it. Just contact Jeff on Twitter probably or on GitHub.
That would be a big contribution.
It would be a very big contribution. Yeah. I'm kind of wondering, it might just be easier since GDoc is already a wiki syntax and ASCII Doctor is kind of a wiki syntax as well. Just have some ugly Groovy script that translates between them. That might be easier in the end. We shall see. Anyway, moving swiftly on, Gradle 2.12 was released. So this had a few changes, not some significant ones, but not many of them. The one significant one for Java and Groovy developers was, of course, the introduction of the compile-only dependency scope. So this is something akin to Maven's provided scope. And much anticipated and moaned about and waited for, but it is finally there. One thing I've noticed is a few complaints on Twitter that they changed the name. It's like, oh, why did you change it from provided to compile only? I'm kind of of the opinion of, well, compile only is a lot more descriptive. It actually fits what it does. Provided just feels like a little bit of a hack. It's like, people use provided, even for situations where it's not about the dependency being available at runtime via a container or something like that. That was just one use case. So compile only is there as a more general mechanism, and trying to move away from some of the ugliness of Maven, where provided and optional are actually both compile only type of dependency scopes. Because optional is, well, we need it to compile. You can use it at runtime as well, but you don't have to. So you don't want to make it an exported dependency. So you already have two different types of compile only scope in Maven. And then there are others, and I think Gradle wants to have a richer model for describing it and to get away from the Maven terminology, because it is confusing. It's been abused basically, because hey, we needed to do this. This is the only feature that allows us to do it. We're going to use it. So I kind of favor moving away from that.
So will the old syntax be maintained for a while? I presume it'll be backward compatible for a little while.
What do you mean by the old syntax?
Just the provided syntax. I mean, that's still going to work. They're not going to disable that, right?
Oh, right. Well, I think that will stay with the war plugin, but it doesn't
I've only
exist.
seen that. Yeah, I've only seen it in a couple places, some open source projects. It was something Spock related. I don't think it was the Spock code base, but it might have been the maybe Spock example where they listed a dependency as a compiled dependency, and then it just says comma provided. I've seen that in a couple spots.
Yeah, so I believe provided will stay in the war plugin, but the core Gradle doesn't actually support provided.
Now,
it's only through plugins.
Presumably, compile only still includes the test dependency as well, right? Or configuration, I guess I should say.
That is a good question, and it was brought up when they asked for feedback on the compile only stuff. It won't. I don't think it does include the test.
That would be the part that would be misleading, just because compile generally includes tests so that you can run your tests and everything compiles.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. They the Gradle guys want to be very I don't know how to explain it, but they want to be very precise over terminology and how things are structured. And they see tests as effectively having runtime concerns. You're testing your code base as if it were a runtime dependency.
The problem is there's already test runtime, and there's already a runtime dependent configuration associated with test.
Yes, exactly. So the stuff that's required at runtime is added to your test stuff, but stuff that's only at compile is compile only. You're saying it's not there at runtime.
Understood.
Therefore, it should be part of tests. So
will there be a compile test only as well, or not?
Possibly.
Okay.
As I say, they're looking at other options. Just Shalk via the Q&A has just mentioned, I was going to mention this as well, the provided and optional also provided by Nexus plugins and the Spring, one of the Spring the dependencies plugin. I can't remember the name of it. They have provided an optional as well. So yeah, those are only available through plugins. So
okay, I did not realize that. Also, by the way, as long as you're mentioning Gradle, there was a comment on Twitter. I'm trying to remember who it was. At any rate, somebody mentioned that they were a little disappointed that more people were not aware of the Gradle W capability. You could call Gradlu if you want, right? That since that's there, they're surprised more people don't take advantage of it, but rather go to the trouble to install Gradle. Now, of course, installing Gradle takes 2 seconds. It's just a zip file, and you set an environment variable, and you go. But the advantage of using the Gradle W script, of course, the wrapper, is that the developer who made the project can therefore specify which version of Gradle that they have tested this project under and that they prefer to use it under.
Yeah, it's essential to the reproducible builds. That's what Gradle team are aiming for. So they highly recommend using the Gradle wrapper. So hopefully, more people get used to the wrapper, because Maven has introduced a wrapper, I believe. Grails has its wrapper. Wrappers are becoming more widespread. So, but yeah, if you're not using the wrapper and you are using Gradle, use the wrapper, and you're listening. Well. And
of course, we can generate it now with Gradle 2.12, so it'll have the compile-only configuration in it.
Yeah, exactly. And then actually the nice thing is you only need one Gradle version installed, because you can generate the wrapper for any version of Gradle. I think actually up to a point. I don't think that's entirely true generally. But anyway, let's move on from that. The 2.12 release also introduces quite a few changes to the software model, the new configuration model. So this won't affect many people because they won't be using it yet. I've been playing with the ASCII Doctor plugin and trying to move it to the new software model. So if you've been doing any of that, there are some changes to annotations, some new features, so check that out. Still on releases, Griffin 2.6.0 has been released. Congratulations to the team. I had a look at the release notes. Unfortunately, most of it was gobbledygook to me. I did not understand what any of it means. I don't use Griffin. I apologize for that. But yeah, congratulations for another major release there. Following up on that, I just got a notification in my email inbox this morning. IntelliJ 2016.1 is available. So
Right.
It sounds like they're changing their numbering.
Right. Yes, I did that myself as well. I went and I foolishly try to update these things. Usually I try to do it like 10 minutes before I'm about to do a presentation. That's a little harsh. But the No Fluff Just Stuff season began last week. Or for me, it began last week. For everybody else, it was 2 weeks ago, but I had a conflict. But I did the night before decide to update my IntelliJ version. And they are now going to a versioning scheme that is the year and then a dot and then a particular major number during the year, and they may throw in minor numbers as well. The goal being to get away from a single annual release and instead get new features out quickly and be able to have multiple releases during a single year in some sort of semantic versioning scheme.
Okay. I mean, it sounds quite cool. I can understand the reasoning behind that. But I expect they'll probably change it again at some point in the future. So.
Regarding the Groovy stuff, by the way, in the latest one, in the 2016.1 release, now you can do Groovy in your watch expressions using the debugger, which I don't normally use, but it's nice to know that that syntax is available. Also, there's this annotation support now. I think Mr. Hockey, the inestimable Mr. Hockey, wrote yet another post about how to turn on the annotation support within IntelliJ, which I assume will be worthwhile in the Groovy stuff as well as elsewhere.
Yeah, yes, I saw that. He tweeted that. I actually had no idea what the annotation processing stuff was for, like the enabling it on Java compilation, until I used Dagger. So I'm starting to use Dagger for lazybones now. It's a really nice small dependency injection, but because it's annotation based, you need to enable annotation processing. And apparently it does kind of work with Gradle and Groovy now.
I've had a minor issue, which I should bring up on the mailing list or something, but I go to all this trouble to tell Java developers about pogos and how cool they are. And sometimes I use like the add immutable AST transform on a pogo. And unfortunately, when I try to use that pogo inside of Java, sometimes the IDE especially doesn't realize that that has a tuple constructor. You know, it's not doing the anticipation of the additional functionality in the IDE when it's looking at Java. It's just it's a minor nuisance, but when you go to all the trouble to show people how cool this is, I hate for the IDEs to then go, well, you got to tweak it.
Yeah, that is a shame.
Yeah.
But hey, ID developers have a tough job. So I think the IntelliJ guys have done really well with this. And the feature I'm really interested in actually is the multiple source set support. So if you have non-conventional source sets in your build, for example, I often have a integration test source set. That I believe will now become a separate module.
Oh, I knew it was going to be supported. I didn't know how.
Yeah, so I mean to me that's fantastic, because it means I don't have to mess around with sorting out the project setup. Having that rich model available in the IDE should make life a lot easier for people. So that's the one I'm really excited about. So I think on the last of the releases, I just bring this up, Betamax testing library. It basically recalls HTTP requests and responses and then replays them back for during later test result runs. It means that you don't have to manually mock HTTP responses yourself, and you can run the tests later offline. So it's 2.0 beta 1 has been released and is available. So it should be a drop-in replacement, but I've been having a few problems with the HTTPS support. So fingers crossed that will be sorted out. Okay, and then
one more thing about Betamax, by the way. First of all, by the way, I get that HTTPS support's a hard problem, so I'm not surprised. Yeah, but by the way, somebody was looking for the Betamax distribution. I mean, I know it's a GitHub. That's what we have linked to, but the homepage for Betamax has become one of those newer URL types, the betamax.software. as the URL now. And I just checked that does direct to the proper location. I mean, my browser says betamax.software, which looks really weird in my browser.
I know, it's confusing. And then of course the package naming convention is now software.betamax. And because of that, I put in the URL software.betamax, and of course that doesn't resolve.
For me, I clicked on that and it went right. Oh no, I'm sorry. I went on the GitHub link and then went from there.
Right. Okay. Anyway, I actually do really like that library. There are others. There's like WireMock as well, and Mock Server, I believe, are both ones in the Java space, but nothing quite as straightforward as automatically recording and replaying requests and responses. Okay, so another release unrelated to software is a book, Learning Groovy book, published through LeanPub, is now available. It was completed a couple of weeks ago, I believe. So if you're looking for an introduction to the Groovy language, I think it assumes some knowledge of Java, but basically it gives you a grounding in Groovy syntax and Groovy features. Okay.
Can I mention one other book release as long as you're mentioning that now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Konstantinos Kapolonis's book, The Java Testing with Spock from Manning, has been out for a little while, but the schedule now says that the EPUB and Kindle versions will be available on the 22nd. So next week, those ones will be available. That book is out now, and it seems to be doing well. It's got a foreword by Luke Daly and everything. So that's an interesting book, and it's another one that will be a good inroad into the Java community to let them know about Groovy and other capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important book, I think, especially for Java developers. Okay, I'm just having a equipment malfunction right now. Okay, so yeah, I don't know what they call it.
No, I'm not going to go there. Anyway. Anyway, so I did want to mention that book, and I still have.
Did we mention it last episode? I can't remember.
I don't know if we mentioned it, but the fact that there's going to be the electronic versions available too, I figured it was worth a mention again. Also, it's always nice to bring that one up. It's one that doesn't normally get mentioned in the list of Groovy related books, so I don't want it to be overlooked. That's all.
Oh, absolutely. I just wasn't sure whether we'd done it last time, because I had it in these notes beforehand. I was like, is that I need to bring it up for this episode, or is that left over from the last episode? Anyway,
I probably should have looked, and I forgot.
I confused myself. But yeah, no, I kind of find it a little bit surprising that the EPUB comes after the paper version. I always expect the electronic versions to be ready straight away.
And if you knew the IT systems at Manning, maybe that wouldn't be such a surprise.
Well, we'll see what happens with Learning Rat Pack.
Right.
When that comes out.
Which is supposedly. Dan, I cannot believe he keeps making all of his progress public. You know, he keeps telling people when these things are happening, and we're updating the software now. And it's like, dude, you only open yourself up to criticism. Well, all right, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's going to be this huge seller because he's doing all this marketing ahead of time. I don't know.
You could also look at it as a motivation, adding pressure to ensure that the stuff gets done. But anyway, keep up the good work, Dan. Looking forward to when that book is available. So there are just a few other items. These are kind of miscellaneous stuff that I found of interest. On the Groovy developer mailing list at the moment, there's a discussion. Somebody is working on the Antler 4 grammar, finally. I mean, this has been on the to-do list for quite a long time now, I think. So somebody's working on that, and that could end up being a big boon for Groovy. For the moment, there's a current discussion on optional parentheses. So if you're not familiar with Groovy, you'll know probably that with method calls, you don't have to put parentheses in, but there are some situations where they're required. it's not always obvious what the rules are for it. It's one of the things I actually dislike is everybody has to learn those rules. So in this discussion, it's like, okay, well, we could introduce other scenarios where it's optional. For example, in conditions. So you could have if, and then inside your if statement, you would have a method call, but without parentheses. So that's not supported at the moment, but could be supported. So if you have any strong opinions on that, I would definitely get onto the developer mailing list and get involved with that discussion. It's the kind of thing that I feel needs as much exposure and feedback as possible, because it has quite a big impact, definitely on us people, anyone that trains people to use Groovy. So yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, maybe if parentheses could always be optional, I'd probably be happier with it. But
I always tell people when I'm teaching them that this is going to sound silly, but this is how I think about it. The parentheses are optional until they're not. Meaning that if the compiler guesses right, if it knows where you meant the parentheses to go, you can often leave them out. But every once in a while, it's going to guess wrong, or you're going to run into an edge case or something, and therefore you just put them back in. It's more that Groovy is not trying to be the shortest language possible. You know, that's Perl, right?
Yeah.
Write-only code, as they say. It's more a question of writing the simplest code possible that's still readable. So I know there are rules, and I have some little tiny examples that show when the compiler guesses wrong and things like that. But I normally say if I only have a single argument to a method, I leave them out. If I have two, then I could go either way. If I have more than two, or the arguments become complicated or whatever, I usually put them in, and I don't generally dig into it more deeply than that. Now, of course, the people working on the actual grammar need the rigorous rules for that, and I've never actually dug into that in any detail. Again, that falls into the category for me of a hard problem. I'll let them work that out, and then I'll just do what they tell me.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely don't want to deal with the technical aspects of it. But
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean by being able to use them inside an if statement, though. Does that mean in an if block itself you have to have the parentheses, or are you talking about something different?
So at the moment you do. So if you have if, and then you have your parentheses for the if condition,
right.
And then you have some object dot read, stream dot read, for example. If there's an argument to the read.
Oh, okay.
Then the parentheses are required. Well, the parentheses are required regardless, apparently. But it could be that you could have, you wouldn't need them. You'd have full command expression support within that if condition.
Interesting.
So that's the kind of thing being discussed. So interesting stuff. So let's moving quickly on some other miscellaneous items. Unfortunately, Brooke is not with us because I wanted to, take the mickey out of him. But anyway, he's had an interview with Stephen Chin you can find it on the Oracle website, entitled Software Module Hell. And this was from Dev Nexus, the conference from a little time back. And he gives his thoughts on dependency management across. It's not just Java dependency management. Talks about Debian and RPMs as well, the Red Hat Package Manager, and discusses some of why it's a hard problem. The reason I was hoping he would be here was because I wanted to ask. Stephen basically said, well, obviously you guys have all this expertise, so when are you going to be releasing the JFrog package manager? To which he said, well, we probably, maybe we should do, but it's hard. So I want to know, I want him to commit JFrog to developing their own package management.
Oh boy, I want to just watch that discussion. I don't want to be in it.
And then we just finish off with an item from UCAN. You defended the honor of the Gradle Shadow plugin. You mentioned in that blog post that some people said it didn't work with the newer versions of Gradle.
Yep, I had all that happened. The way that came out is I was on Twitter, of course. I spend way too much time on Twitter. And by the way, is there a more hollow feeling of accomplishment than finally catching up on your Twitter feed? It's like, oh boy, oh well, you know. Any rate, I had a friend. I had retweeted about the Gradle 2.12 release. And that's when somebody stepped in and said, oh, they broke the shadow plugin with Gradle 2.12. It also isn't working under 2.11. And I went, really? I didn't know that. At which point, a couple people stepped in and said, wait a minute, the latest version of the shadow plugin does work. The 1.2.3 maybe, or 3.2, whatever the current version of the shadow plugin is, they said work just fine. And that's when I felt like, oops, I may have misled people into thinking that shadow didn't work. And John Engelman's done a wonderful job of that. For those people who are not aware of what the shadow plugin is, it's simply a way to make a so-called fat jar. It's a jar that includes all the dependencies inside so that you don't, you could deliver a single jar to your client and it will include everything inside it. It doesn't have to go download things in order to build itself. So any rate, I built a trivial little project. I wrote a blog post about this and added the shadow plugin. And of course, everything worked both with Gradle 2.11 and 12 and the latest version of the shadow plugin. And you know, John's always got that nice little Easter egg where if you run the knows KNOWS task under Gradle, then you get the shadow nose and you get the beautiful little picture and everything. So at any rate, it was fun. It was just, again, I felt like I had introduced a problem or implied that there was a problem because someone said there was and I hadn't checked it out. So I felt obligated to get in there and make sure people knew, no, it runs just fine and it's great and go ahead and use it. I know the Rat Pack people use it a lot, right? I think it's a built-in plugin for Rat Pack.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, it is, because they originally had something built in, and then I think Craig, the guy behind the shadow plugin, is Craig behind it? Oh no, John R. Engelman. Yeah. So I think John replaced the kind of handcrafted version with the shadow plugin.
It's always kind of nice to throw in the new syntax with the little plugins and ID, and then also to throw in the application plugin. So you just specify a Groovy script as your main class, and now you not only have a complete jar file, you have an executable jar file that will run the script and everything when you run it. Using just the shadow plugin adds a run task and then also a shadow run jar task as well, which will build the jar first and then execute it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole runnable jar has become so popular now with boot run, Spring Boot, and everything else. Apart, I think, mostly because of simplified deployment.
It also helps in places where they have nasty firewalls set up and therefore have a difficult time downloading dependencies. This way, if you build your jar ahead of time, your shadow jar, I should say, or your fat jar, you can simply deliver that self-contained jar to them and they don't have to go over the internet to grab any dependencies that may very well be blocked. I keep running into too many companies like that. It's so frustrating.
I know all about like proxies, for example. Oh dear. Anyway, let's move on. We're just actually finishing up. I think you want to. Do you still want your soapbox?
I do. Before I do that, let me make. Oh, sorry. Did you have one?
Yeah, I just have one more thing. I just wanted to double check that you want your soapbox. So apparently, Jen Strater. So she's very active in Great Ladies. She apparently will be going to the Technical University of Denmark to do a computer sciences master's. So congratulations to her. I hope she has a really good time there. Of course, she'll hopefully be very active in Great Conf EU while she's over there. She's going to be studying, the researchers associated with Groovy itself, studying the language.
Which is really cool. I mean, it's directly related, and she's going to be actively involved in it. That's really great. She also did something good recently on generation of documentation, I think, for Rat Pack. She was involved. Yeah, did you catch a note of what that was?
I can't remember off the top of my head, unfortunately.
But she's been being very active, and I expect that will continue. By the way, the Great Ladies Group, which originated in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, now has a Great Allies group as well. For those people who feel a little bit uncomfortable wearing a Great Ladies t-shirt, I expect I'll have a Great Allies t-shirt as well at some point. I'm looking forward to getting one. Hopefully she'll have them by Great Conf in the US, or at least the group will have them by then.
Okay, that'd be cool. Right, well, I expect to see that on the the podcast immediately after Great Coffee US.
I have my Great Ladies t-shirt, and I wear it, but I do feel a little funny sometimes. It's easier when my wife's with me, you know.
Yeah. Okay, so you have an item yourself plus your soapbox.
Yeah, this is, I don't want to overdo this, and I love many Apple products, especially my MacBook. I'm never giving up my MacBook under any circumstances, although I'm one of those unusual MacBook / Android people rather than, you know, Mac and everything else, you know, everything else Apple. But Apple appears to have a policy that is difficult on the open source community. Apparently, if you work on an open source project and you do well, it may help you get hired by Apple. But if you do get hired by Apple, then you basically vanish from the open source community. You can no longer participate or say anything or certainly contribute anymore. We saw this to some degree with Peter Niederwiese when he left the Spock framework. Fortunately, Luke Daly was able to pick up on that very ably and continue the effort on that. But I mean, that was a project where he was by far the largest contributor and he created it. And now it's as though he never existed. I mean, he doesn't say anything. He doesn't contribute anything. He's gone. And I meant to mention something then, but then what happened is one of my absolute favorite Gradle plugins, one of the ones I really like, is called Gretty. Gretty. The Gretty plugin allows you to deploy a WAR file onto Jetty or Tomcat or even a farm of them, a cluster and everything, and start and stop them and run integration tests and everything. It's really slick. And whenever I use a web application, I often use it for testing, if nothing else. And that plugin was maintained by, I think it's Andrew Hilofsky. Pardon me. He made a presentation on it at last year's Gradle Summit. Well, I mentioned the Gretty plugin on Twitter to a friend, and then they came back and said, well, it looks like a great plugin, but nothing's been happening on it for some time. And when I looked into that, I discovered that, yes, indeed, he'd gotten hired by Apple and therefore had vanished. You know, it's as though he's not in the open source community anymore. And I don't know. I mean, it must be policy. I just don't know anybody at Apple that I could ask. I've known a few people be hired by them, but I find it really sad, you know, really difficult that their policy apparently is that if you're going to work for Apple, the world outside of Apple can't even know about your existence anymore, especially the open source world. Is that consistent with what you've seen as well?
I mean, I don't know much about it. I only know of Peter Niederwiese, but as I said just before the podcast, I find it strange that they seem to use a lot of open source, and I think I remember them sort of publicizing that they contribute to open source in certain projects.
Well, if anyone that we have as a listener, you know, it's probably getting to be an old gag that we only have a half dozen, but whatever. I mean, if anybody listens to this and decides to straighten me out on this or to agree or whatever, I suppose it's a cheap way to get listeners is to say something inflammatory. I didn't mean to do that. I just mean that I really was disappointed because, again, that is my favorite, just about my favorite of all the Gradle plugins, plus losing the creator of Spock to that sort of thing. It's just very disappointing. And I hope that's not the way they act normally, but all the evidence seems to suggest that. So if somebody knows better or can explain that or anything like that, we'd love to hear from you either on Twitter or privately, however they want to reply.
Yeah, fingers crossed somebody does. It'd be nice to know, you know, formally, rather than there just being this silence coming from Apple.
Right.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. Unless there was
I have a couple miscellaneous ones real quick. Apparently, there's going to be a presentation at Greach on the JSON views inside of Grails. We mentioned it in the last podcast, and it's come up as it's going to be a lightning talk, and that would be very helpful because of the trend toward RESTful web services and everything. The tweet I saw had it in the context of doing a graph plugin using one of those JavaScript graphical libraries, and therefore if you could serve up JSON data and you're in a JSON view, that ought to be a very natural thing. So I think that would be pretty cool to see. Another one, by the way, is it also came up on the Twitter list. We mentioned this in the last podcast, and I'll be continuing to mention it, that Spring 1 2GX has now split. The Spring 1 people have their own conference, and the 2GX part is now called the G3 Summit, and on the website G3Summit. I think it's .org, might be .com. At any rate, that one is the G3 stands for Groovy, Grails, and Gradle, unless you are Andres Almiray, at which point one of those probably switches to Griffin, but we'll have to ask. It turns out that is the first 3 days of December in Fort Lauderdale. We expect to talk a lot more about that starting probably around July or whatever, but the call for papers is open in that. It is available on the website, and you're encouraged to participate. I know I'm going to be taking a larger role there. I talked to Jay Zimmerman about it. If there's one thing Jay Zimmerman knows how to do, is to run a conference, so that's a good thing. Speaking of Jay Zimmerman, again, we need to thank the No Fluff Just Stuff people for giving us a homepage, the nofluffjuststuff.com/Groovy Podcast. We'll have both the video and the audio versions of this podcast as soon as the feeds update. And I know we have other alternatives as well, but at least I can check off that I mentioned that.
Cool. Well, we're on the thanks. Of course, a regular thank you to Jakob for his Grails diary as well. It's also much of many of our news items. He does a nice lot of research. It's never easy to trawl through tweets and other things to keep track of these items. So the last thing I wanted to mention, Great Day, the very first ever Great Day in Warsaw is this weekend. It's on the Saturday, 19th of March. So good luck with the conference there if you're going. I hope you have a good time. Let us know how it goes.
The one time I've been to Warsaw, I actually did a Groovy class there, and they were outstanding developers. I was really impressed with the quality of the people there. I'll bet that's a great conference. No pun intended, sorry. No, that's ruined now. I can't use that phrase anymore.
It's tough. It's tough.
We should also, by the way, as long as we're thanking, mention the Groovy Calamari person as well. That's always a helpful newsletter, although I don't think there was one between the last one and now, but last Groovy Podcast and now, I mean. So I expect those to be out pretty soon as well. And who knows, maybe someday, and that day may never come, Guillaume Laforge will put out another Groovy Weekly.
It was just a Groovy. It turned into the Groovy newsletter. So he recognized it would not be weekly anymore.
Well, we all knew. I mean, oh my goodness, you get busy. How the heck he's going to keep up something like that in his spare time? But I know someday he will wind up putting out another edition. And just letting you know, we all understand. Don't worry that it's late. We just look forward to hearing your perspective on things. That's fine.
With that, we'll sign off. Thank you very much.
And the call for papers is out, right? Or the registration is open. Registration is open for GreatConf EU now. That was tweeted this morning, I believe. So that conference is being scheduled. And that reminds me, one last thing. I know, I'm sorry. But Cedric Champeau has updated the GreatConf Agenda app, which is an Android app that's written in Groovy. So if you are able to install that, and I saw that tweet, so I installed it this morning, and I was able to browse through it. Everything looks great. But that is if nothing else, that's basically our biggest sample app for how to do Groovy inside of Android. So I encourage you to take a look at that, both because it's a useful app, especially if you're going to GreatConf, and also because I believe all the source code is available in case you want to learn how Groovy is done in Android.
Excellent. Thank you, Cedric, for keeping that work going as well. So with that, are there any further interruptions?
No, I think that's it.
So once again, thank you everyone for listening. I think now we average around 500 listeners. So thank you to all of you for listening, and hopefully catch you next time. So
and I'm going to hear from all of them this time. I know it. Take care.
Bye-bye.